Greetings, context of white supremacy, Gus T Renegade and Justice in for another program to share constructive information on racism, white supremacy, what it is, and how it works. Thank you, everyone, for tuning into the broadcast. I hope you're getting constructive information. Again, we have way too many problems to be wasting time. Hope that every time that you tune in, we have the courage to honestly confront racism, white supremacy head on. I want to get started with this evening's program, give you a little bit of a teaser directly from the book. This is on page 76 of the book that we're going to look at for this evening. Indeed, a recent barrage of media reports have provided overwhelming evidence of police racism. In March 1992, a newspaper report in The Age revealed that a South Australian police station displayed a racist crossword, and that when a complaint was made, a police officer admitted authorship and $125 was deducted from his pay for a breach of discipline. Later that year, the ABC television program Cop-It Sweet documented police abuse in Redfern, creating a national scandal and prompting a formal inquiry by the NSW Commissioner of Police. On the program, on-duty police officers were taped referring to Redfern as quote-unquote Coon County and its residents as coons and gooks. In addition, the film showed police repeatedly using obscenities and making derogatory remarks as they went about their business. It seems, however, that national and international opinion does not make an impact upon the Australian legal, police, and prison communities, for not more than 8 days after the screening of Cop-It Sweet, ABC television aired another report, this time on the so-called Bork Outback Trek incident, which showed portions of a home video of off-duty police officers in blackface with ropes tied in hanging nooses around their necks in a sick and vicious parody of the victims' Aboriginals, in a sick and vicious parody of the victims of Aboriginal deaths in custody. This action from within the police department created yet another national scandal. People all across the country, both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal, were absolutely horrified. Dolly Eates' widow, one of the men ridiculed, Dolly Eates' widow of one of the men ridiculed, David Gundy, who had been killed mistakenly, in quotes, by the police in 1989, stated, "My son can't get over how they make fun of his father like this. I'm disgusted that they can make fun and expect everyone to sit around and laugh about it. I think it's inhumane." This is page 76 and 77 of the book, The Great White Flood, Racism in Australia. Extremely constructive book. I would highly recommend it to any non-white people who are listening to the program anywhere in the world. I hope that passage resonates for anyone who's familiar with Vincent Chin, Stephen Lawrence, Oscar Grant, Frederick Germain Carter. This is not an isolated incident. This is routine behavior, unfortunately, under the system of white supremacy. Our guest for today's program earned a PhD from the University of Sydney in 1995. She also earned a Doctor of Divinity from India in 1997. She has an extraordinary resume. She's the former executive director of Townley College in Australia, also former director of the Center of Indigenous, Vocational, education and training, also in Australia. She is also the author of Aboriginal Spirituality, Past, Present, Future. Real pleasure to have her on the program. She is joining us live from Australia, our guest, Dr. Ann Pattel-Gray. Dr. Ann Pattel-Gray, you're with us?
Yes, I am.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing, actually for you, sharing a bit of your Monday afternoon with us. Real pleasure to have you on the program.
It's an extreme pleasure to be here.
Wow. For folks who might not be familiar with your work, maybe they haven't read your material, could you give us kind of a brief synopsis of some of the work that you're doing?
Basically, my heart and my commitment is to Aboriginal people, my people here in Australia, the traditional people of this land, something similar to the Native American Indians. I have given tirelessly to our struggle, and basically now I'm working for traditional landowners here in southeast Queensland, and their applicants for native title. Native title here means applying to prove your lineage and connection to land, and hopefully one day they'll achieve native title and they'll be recognised as the traditional landowners of their country. And basically, in doing what I do, I encounter racism on a daily basis. You can't be Aboriginal in this country and work for Aboriginal people without encountering, systematic racism, both bureaucracy, societal, cultural, and every other element.
Again, I think anyone listening to the program anywhere in the world, I think you will learn a lot listening to Dr. Ann Pattel-Gray, and I again highly recommend her book, The Great White Flood, Racism in Australia. I want to try to share as much of your material as we can today. Before I get started, you've already shared you are non-white Aboriginal female.
Yep.
Okay. This program, context of white supremacy, I have unfortunately concluded that we are in a global system of racism, white supremacy. I use those two terms as synonyms. I have the exact same definition for both terms. That definition is as follows. A global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they classify as not white. Do you believe that such a system exists, and do you think that definition is accurate?
Oh, I think that definition is definitely accurate. And yes, it does exist. Just look at now the U.S., focus on terrorism. Isn't it a coincidence that it just happens to be non-white people? The Arab community and Muslim community who have built their countries and developed economic systems and have one of the richest resources in the world called oil. And we see the systematic process of the U.S. government trying to smash that country and take control of its economic base. It's, you've only got to look around the world and see white supremacy practiced around the world, all in the name, this one called terrorism. But Cuba, everywhere else in the world, wherever a country is deemed to be powerful and independent, therefore it must be smashed and must submit to the white powers that be.
Wow. I hope people, if you are new listening to the cows, I just want it in the record books. The two previous programs, we had a black male, Majemit Jaboro, black male. He was in the area of the world known as Nigeria. The program yesterday, we had a black male, Dr. William Les Henry, black male in the area of the world known as the United Kingdom. Now our guest, Dr. Ann Pattel-Gray. All three guests all agreed. System of white supremacy, all three guests. That definition is accurate. I hope everyone listening, let that sink in. Total world system of white supremacy.
Exactly.
My co-host, she is with us. Justice, if you have some questions for Dr. Ann Pattel-Gray, your line is open. Please go right ahead.
Just before we go into... Sorry, Justice. Just before we go into that, I just want to give you a background on that book, The Great White Flood. That was the result of my PhD research in 1995. And when it came time for me to get it published, I tried several publishing houses in Australia to publish that thesis because I wanted it to be used by the next generation of Aboriginal people to be able to understand and define racism in its full focus, and to be able to know how to combat it and name it. Now that thesis, all publishing houses in Australia refused to publish it. It had to go to the U.S. It was published by the Academy of Religion to begin with, and now it has been partnershiped and now owned by Oxford. And you could not buy it off the shelf in Australia. If you didn't know it existed, you wouldn't even know where to look for it. Fortunately enough, the media, my office ran a campaign to let all universities know, particularly the Aboriginal enclaves in the university, that this was available. And it's one of the most leading textbooks in the majority of Aboriginal units of the universities now to help equip and prepare our future leaders. But isn't it ironic? Because Australia, to this day, cannot own its history of racism, let alone its present, current role in racism. It wants to believe that everybody else is racist but them. Quite often I get told by Australian bureaucrats, the US is just horrific. Their racism is, one of the worst in the world. I said, I argue to disagree. You just scratch the surface a little bit here in Australia and you people could win it hands down when you consider what you've done to this country and what you've done to the Aboriginal people. You've bastardised them, you've raped them, you've committed genocide, you've poisoned them, you've taken their children and imprisoned them, and then you've moved them off their land and rounded them up and put them in concentration camps, I call them. And, when you've got a history like that, the Jews don't stand alone with their Holocaust because that Holocaust has been committed in the US, in Australia, everywhere around the world where you find white supremacy and white bureaucrats. Even look at South Africa now, as it continues. It's just absolutely ironic that white people want to stand and say, we're not racist, and yet you look at the global practice of racism. Finished.
Well said.
Okay, I actually have a few questions. Why did you become a doctor, and what caused you to be interested in learning more about and combating racism, white supremacy?
The reason I decided to do a doctorate is because in order to be equal with white people and to have an influence, you have to hold the highest level of education that's obtainable. And in this case, that's a PhD. Then and only then are you given a little bit of credit as knowing what you're talking about, as having some level of intelligence. And why I chose to look at racism is because I've lived a life under oppressive racist legislation, and my families have been legislated over through racism. So my entire life has been impacted by it, and I just wanted to be able to empower my people to be able to identify it, know where it exists, and know how to combat it. So basically, that's what I've spent my life, combating racism. And the way to do that is to educate our people and to equip them and to be able to empower them to a point where they can call it when they see it.
Why did you write the book, The Great White Flood, Racism in Australia?
I wrote it because, one, it became a tool, a learning tool for my people, but two, it became a tool of education for people all around the globe to learn about our struggle, to learn about the level of racism that has permeated and oppressed us, Aboriginal people here in Australia. I wanted to be able to reach out to other people who were feeling somewhat isolated through their experience of their own racism, and for them to realise they're not the only ones suffering this and they're not doing it alone, that in fact it is a global front, and we need to be talking more and more together, those of us who are the victims of racism. And we need to be able to unify, to empower, and to work together to challenge this global movement and basically rise up and speak out and expose it for what it is.
The front cover of your book, The Great White Flood, Racism in Australia. What does the image mean on the cover of your book, and why did you put it there?
Well, basically, Australia was, before the Europeans came here, it was totally populated by Aboriginal people. Our lineage goes back 50 to 100,000 years that we lived on this continent, free of racism, free of oppression, and we lived with the land. We were spiritually connected to the land. And basically, all of that changed once European invasion happened. So that big tall ship represents, on the top of that wave, represents the first ship that invaded our country and the ongoing onslaught. And as you can see, the Aboriginal people who are looking up at this massive wave are looking up in horror and terror at this wave coming in on top of them. Well, that's been our life. For 235 years since European invasion, our basic human rights have been denied. And not only that, our cultural inherent rights as the Aboriginal people of this land have been absolutely smashed, not recognised in any capacity. And there is a length of pain that goes with that. I mean, a time of pain, transgenerational trauma, where that trauma of that history has been passed on through stories, experience from one generation to another. And we still today fight for our elders that are deceased, our old people that died, for justice, for truth, for recognition, for compensation, for restitution, and for the rights to our country as Aboriginal people. So that imagery on the front cover symbolises a lot of things for us, but the most thing it symbolises is no matter what they've done, we're still here. As much as they tried to kill us out, we're still here and we're still fighting.
When you see non-white people getting directly mistreated in Australia, do you say or do anything to attempt to stop the mistreatment? If so, what do you say or do?
Oh, gosh, I do that on a daily basis, love. I do not tolerate racism in any form, and especially the mistreatment of our people. As one of the leaders, I'll gather people, we'll protest, we'll march, we'll go to the media, we'll go to the highest official to bring about justice for our people. We are, in Queensland, where I come from, a very radical group of people. We've lived under the most racist legislation you could ever come across. Our legislation has been similar to that of the South for African American people. And so we're a very staunch and radical people, but no, we will not tolerate it. And yes, I do stand up and challenge it whenever I see it.
I think that's an excellent response, and I'm glad that you help the non-white people who are getting mistreated there. I mean, same here. There's tons of mistreatment where I am, and yeah, I don't have any more questions at this time. Go ahead, Gus.
Yeah, I mean, you know, at the moment, like you guys have over there, we've got this global terrorism that's going on. So every Muslim and Arab is, you know, alleged terrorist, you know. So we see our government picking people off left, right and centre here, you know, and the mistreatment. And it's appalling. It's appalling. You know, what I can't understand is why it is so hard for white people to say openly and honestly, we don't understand that group of people, and it's through our ignorance we act in fear. However, possibly, could I learn from you? What could I learn from you that would make me a better human being? You know, it is so easy to say these words and to be open to the possibility of another race of people teaching you something, and yet, you know, white people assume the heights of excellence, that they have achieved the ultimate of human development, and therefore they have nothing more to learn. And that is where their downfall begins, because every culture we can learn from each other, and possibly when we take the time to do that, we become better human beings and a better society, because we take the time to know our neighbour and to share in, you know, in the thanksgiving of being friends, community, and a nation.
Context of white supremacy. Our program here in the States, I know under racism, white supremacy, white people tend to do a pretty good job of diseducating us and not giving us correct information. Many people, myself included, are pretty ignorant about the history of Australia, especially within the context of white supremacy. I wanted you to kind of give some of the fundamentals that non-white people should understand that you touch on in your book, particularly the aspect, I believe it's Terra nullius. What that
Terra nullius.
Yes, Terra nullius. Why that term is important to understand the history of white supremacy, the area of the world known as Australia, and if it's accurate, if non-white people, when they think of Australia, they should think genocide against indigenous black people.
Definitely. Terra nullius is a legal term that was fabricated by the British when they invaded Australia and took ownership of Australia. Terra nullius basically means land belonging to no one. So, in fact, when they invaded this country, even though when they landed, war was, prominent, Aboriginal people with their spears and whatever hunting parties went on the war campaign to alleviate themselves of these white invaders because of their atrocities that they were committing, and against their women and against their children. And basically when they landed, they gave no human recognition to Aboriginal people. We were classified as flora and fauna. We weren't even human. And in fact, Charles Darwin, he talks about the survival of the fittest and the species of evolution. And he classifies us and doesn't, it calls us the missing link between ape and human. And I mean, when you've got anthropology that has grown out of this science and is worldwide now on the basis of what he wrote, a whole discipline was manufactured which legitimated the subhuman conditions of black people and Aboriginal people in particular. This is horrifying when you consider anthropology is a leading academic subject in all universities around the world, and that's what it's founded on pure basis of racism, of legitimating the inferiority of black people, and particularly Aboriginal people in this country. Isn't that appalling?
Racism, white supremacy. Could you also make sure you share the importance, if there have ever been any treaties with the indigenous population of Australia?
Even though Captain Cook, who was the first British soldier to come here, was instructed to get agreements with the local people, inhabitants, he never followed through. So there has never been a treaty in this country. That's why we have fought for what we call native title. That was a campaign led by a man called Eddie Marbo, who fought for native title of his land. And he died, I think it was 6 months before the ruling at the federal courts. So he never even got to see the win. And he died and native title was recognised. Then the government system here, under Howard government, everybody thinks what a wonderful Prime Minister Howard was. He's just a white supremacist in a coat and a tie, who basically legislated 10 points that the Aboriginal people had to go through in the court system here to be able to gain native title. Now, in light of that, when you consider the history of stolen children, people being forcibly removed off their land at gunpoint, put into missions, one of the conditions of native title is proving your continuation and connection to your country, even though it was government legislation. So you see the catch-22. How do we prove our continuation to our land when we were forcibly moved off our land? And families dispersed all over this country. And even today now, 235 years later, still trying to find one another. Brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers, you name it, we're still looking for each other. And so native title is the closest thing we're going to get to a treaty. But once again, we have to go through the white courts to justify our connection, even though they dismiss the history of legislation that forcibly removed us off our land. You know, no matter what you do, as they say, poor fella me, black fella, poor fella me. We never win, no matter what we do.
Wow. Again, our guest, Dr. Ann Pattel-Gray. You touched on that. I think this is really important for listeners to understand how many of the core racist policies in Australia have been about the destruction of indigenous families. Can you talk about how the quote-unquote assimilation policy, how that's been an integral weapon against black people in Australia?
Well, before we had assimilation, I'll start before that, we had what we call the Protection Act, which was where they forcibly removed Aboriginal people off the land because they wanted the pastoralists to come in and to take the land, the rich gentry. And they forcibly moved off the land and put them into missions and reserves. Missions were controlled by the churches and reserves were controlled by the government, and basically locked in compounds to never be able to hunt, gather, do ceremony, nothing there. The language was outlawed. We weren't allowed to speak our language. It was forbidden. And if any Aboriginal people stood up to fight against this oppressive system, they were forcibly removed and put onto islands around Australia, where they basically were in prison, never to see their people again. When they found that, they hoped that we were dying out. They called us the dying race in the 60s and that, and they thought we were all going to die out because of the introduced diseases that came with the West, and we had no immune system to fight them. But anyhow, we survived. Then we had, through the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, white men going out and raping Aboriginal women and girls. So we ended up having a lot of half-caste children, and of course, which Aboriginal people were raising. And this was an absolute indictment on the Victorian lifestyle of the white women, to see these half-castes running around, knowing full well it was their husbands who were pregnating the Aboriginal women through force. So they wanted to hide that shame, and so they came up with another policy called assimilation. So every half-caste child in Australia was forcibly removed from their mothers, never to see again in a lot of cases, and put into Western institutions to be trained and taught how to be servants for the white Victorian race. And in these institutions, these kids were sexually abused, molested. The trauma that a lot of these children suffered was just, would scar them for life, would end up scarring them for life. Then they found through our political movement, our land rights movement, we were totally opposed to what they were doing and fought with them out in the streets. The police beat us, they locked us up, they did everything. But we wouldn't lay down. We brought in the World Council churches, and then other political people came in and they saw it, and it was a real embarrassment to white Australia. So they abolished the legislation, and those children that were taken under the assimilation policy are referred to today as the stolen generations. Some politicians want to refer to it in a singular as generation. We're talking about 5 generations of children forcibly removed from their parents and their family and their community. We've got people who are still searching for their families today, and a lot of the times finding their parents dead by the time they get there. You know, the destruction of what they did to the race of Aboriginal people is appalling. To basically disconnect them and commit cultural genocide, as we call it, on a race of people.
Wow. Wow. I definitely want to make sure that I include in this book, The Great White Flood. Dr. Ann Pattel-Gray, she touches all areas of people activity. She's very explicit about that racism, white supremacy is practiced and has infected all areas. There's nothing that you can do that is not tainted by racism. And she cites tons of illustrations in the book. I mean, lots of evidence. I highly recommend folks read it. I want to specifically point at religion. This is on page 123, the section Racism in the Australian Church. You write, the European so-called Christians did not bring the Christ, the Anointed One. They did not share a liberating Christ with the Aboriginal people of Australia. Rather, they brought a Christ that saved and liberated only the white colonists, but not the black indigenous peoples, who were considered to be non-human, or at best, a relic of the childhood of the race preserved by Australia's isolation. Australian theology brought a Christ that dispossessed, enslaved, and killed, a Christ full of hatred and fear, a Christ of racism. Australian theology did not teach or share with Aboriginal people about a Christ that was about his creative and reconciling, renewing work, for it was too busy seeking to justify the dividing walls of hostility that were being constructed, walls such as Terra, nullius, slavery, and segregation. The law of Christ as the principle or norm of love for one another was being broken continuously. The colonist Christians did not bring the Christ of the Bible, and thus the story certainly was not the good news. This is page 123. I assert that white supremacy is the strongest religion on the planet. And in my view, I think it would be accurate to say that when white people came to Australia, they did not bring the religion of Christianity. They brought the religion of white supremacy. And I think there's a ton of evidence to support that. Can you kind of touch on some of that, how integral the church has been in the practice of white supremacy?
They have been hand in hand with the government, and to their shame. You know, from the first day of invasion, the church has been merely a tool, an instrument used by the government to suppress, to subjugate, and to indoctrinate a race of people. And they have used that weapon of Christianity as the tool to do that. And Aboriginal people on a whole are very spiritual people, like most black people. And when they brought this so-called Bible, as some elders would say, you know, when you came here, you gave me the Bible, but you took my land. Well, that isn't a fair trade, I reckon. And they're telling them, you can have the bloody Bible back. We don't want it. Because of what you've done with that. Now, the church, you know, through the segregation, through assimilation, the church were the instrument of implementing that policy. How devastating is that? To dehumanize a people, to commit cultural genocide on a race. You know, as I say, we all talk about the pearly gates. Well, I'd hate to be them when it's time for the pearly gates, because I think that quite a few of them are going to roast in hell, you know, for what they have committed here in Australia. It is appalling. And a lot of Aboriginal people have left the church on that basis. because they see it as another instrument of white supremacy, as a tool to subjugate Aboriginal people, and therefore won't have anything to do with it. We've got a race of people that are so broken. You know, substance abuse is extremely high. Poverty is extremely high. Poor education, poor health, you know, high incarcerations. You know, our people represent nearly 90% of inmates in jails and juvies.
Can you repeat that?
Yet we're 1% of the population.
I'm sorry for interrupting. Can you repeat that one more time?
We represent incarceration numbers in jails and in juvenile centres. 90% of inmates are Aboriginal. So to be black in this country is to be classified as a criminal.
Double whammy.
Isn't it? It is absolutely appalling, and most of them in there, because they've had poor legal representation, and because of a racist system that just incarcerates them. Whereas most white people with the same offences walk away. But unfortunately, being Aboriginal, as I said, is an offence in this country, and our jail systems prove that because of the high population numbers of our people in there.
Again, I hope everyone who is listening, this should sound real familiar. Again, we are so far apart, Dr. and Pattel-Gray. It's Monday afternoon. For me, it's still Sunday evening, and early Sunday evening, too. But exact same problem. Poor legal representation. I mean, that should resonate with black people all over the world. Wow. You know, one of the things that we Aboriginal people are, you know, is we're staunch supporters of other black people around the world. You know, when ANC, when the whole movement to abolish apartheid in South Africa began, do you know, here in Australia, nobody would touch that whole issue. Aboriginal people, we had an office in Sydney. We took the ANC representative in and we gave that person an office and we paid for everything for that person. And we lobbied and campaigned this government until they got on board against apartheid. And it took us at least a decade to get this government on board through sheer embarrassment and political campaigns. But finally we did. And, you know, and for our Native American Indians, we're staunch for them. We will take up the campaigns for them. We will do a lot of things, and we have campaigned for people all around the world where injustice is happening to them. And, you know, it is very difficult because we have a passion. We know what it's like to be oppressed. We know what it's like to live under a racist regime. And we feel for other black people of the world. And, you know, the greatest influence the U.S. has on us today is those African-American achievers that you have over there. They impact upon our community in a large way. And, you know, Malcolm X, mate, everybody here knows Malcolm X. They can tell you his resume, they can tell you his background. That's how informed our people are. And Martin Luther King, you know, but we rather go with Malcolm X because of his staunchness. But even though people don't know about us, we make it our business to know about you. And we make it our business wherever we need to think we need to be to align ourselves to support people, we're doing it. And we continue to do it, you know, in any capacity that we can. We don't have a lot, but one thing we do have is we have courage, we have commitment, and we have the love of black people in their hearts.
So, you know, we're there whenever anybody needs us.
I thought it really stood out to me. So many things in the book stood out, but when you talked about knowing, you just said that you all make it your business to know about other folks. I have concluded that white people make it their business to know about their practice of racism, white supremacy, and I thought it was just an incredible passage. I hope you will allow me to read a little bit. This is page 82 and page 83, Racism in Australia. And I just want to make sure listeners hear this. Listen closely. Racist denial will have some Australians claiming, "I did not know." The fact, however, is that white society has long been receiving very well-documented studies and reports, not only condemning the deplorable conditions, but also outlining possible measures to be taken to remedy them. The list of examples is overwhelming. From the last century's damaging public inquiries, such as the 1849 Select Committee on Aborigines and Protectorate, to historic and often notorious legislative measures, such as the Queensland Act to make provision for the better protection and care of the Aboriginal half-caste inhabitants of the colony 1897, to the severe criticism of Queensland's Aborigines Act 1971 through 1979 and its Community Services Act 1984 by the Federal Human Rights and Equal Opportunity Commission as violating human rights, to the many publications on the topic, to the more recently well-publicized and controversial visit by then Federal Minister for Health, Senator Graham Richardson, to the Northern Territory. Australian society knew and did not act. The churches are not exempt, for they also knew all too well about the situation. Throughout history, there are numerous reports by clergy and missionaries protesting degrading conditions imposed by whites upon Aboriginals. More recently, the evidence is even more clear. The world ecclesial community, for example, has informed about these grave situations during briefings and media conferences, as well as through internal studies and reports. The World Council of Churches, World Conference on Mission and Evangelism in Melbourne in 1980, the WCC Central Committee in Geneva in 1990, the WCC 7th Assembly in Canberra in 1991, the International Team Visits to Aboriginal Communities, the International Pastoral Visit to Australia, and most recently, the International Roundtable Visit to Central Australia. Here again, the case of the Aboriginal community is helpful. In 1988, the Honorable Justice Marcus Einfeld, then President of the Human Rights and Equal Opportunity Commission, made the following statement: "The white community has profited at the expense of Aborigines and Islanders and has preferred itself to them for 200 years. Successive white generations have both deliberately and by careless neglect and to their own advantage deprived successive black generations or permitted them to be deprived of everything human beings have ever had or wanted: land and home, dignity, decency, and privacy, culture and language, a proud heritage for their children, equality of opportunity with others, education, health and employment, even life itself." By contrast, the Aboriginal and Islander population has not inflicted any of these sufferings on the white population. It has been a quite ruthless one-way street strewn with blood, violence, and victims. Both the government and the church have known all along about the problems, and they are unable to claim ignorance of these issues. The fact of the continued existence of these crises for the Aboriginal people is a testament to the continuing inaction by the Australian health and medical systems. Perhaps this is stated most clearly by the President of the Australian Medical Association, Dr. Brendan Nelson, who stated in a nationwide television interview that he is ashamed of the medical profession for allowing this state of affairs to continue. I know that was a little long, but I hope the importance came through. White people are not ignorant about what they've done. I think you have tons of evidence that they spend a lot of money piling up papers on what they have done to abuse you all. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Oh, yeah, I totally agree. You know, for white people to say, oh, I didn't know, is because they choose ignorance. You know, it's become a part of their facade. It's become a part of their toolkits. Ignorance, and to claim ignorance, is a mechanism which they go to when they can't defend their supremacy. So they go back to, oh, I didn't know, I was ignorant. Don't be fooled by it, because it is merely an act and a game that they're playing. Because for people to claim ignorance today in this world of heightened technology, surely you can't be that gullible to be fooled by that. And I meet them every day here in Australia. You know, their claim of ignorance, and all they got to do is watch TV, because the media certainly portray us in a negative light here. And you only got to go to your local library. You got to make it a part of your own interest. And, you know, the problem is for us black folk, we aren't an interest in the white world, except when they're confronted by our oppression and by our challenges. Do they then say, oh, I'm sorry, I was ignorant? And as I said, it's just an excuse. One that you shouldn't allow them to get away with, because in this day and age, there's millions of people that are suffering. How can you turn a blind eye to millions of people who are suffering under the hands of racists and say, I didn't know?
Again, our guest, a privilege to have her on the program, live from Australia, Dr. Ann Pattel-Gray. Justice, if you have some more questions, please go right ahead.
Do you have any white friends that you hang out with?
Yeah, I suppose you could ask that question. Of course I do. Yes, you wouldn't believe it when you hear me sometimes, would you? No, I have many white friends, and I even have white relatives that are married into our people. But these are enlightened ones. What you need to be able to do is, you know, you can choose your friends. Unfortunately, sometimes you can't choose your relatives, but you can choose your friends. And if your friends don't choose to be enlightened, then don't choose to be their friends, because you make the difference. When you choose friends and you choose to associate with people, then make sure they're worthy of your friendship, and make sure that they at least stand on some of the principles you stand on, because otherwise they're not worthy of your friendship. But no, I have a lot of white friends.
Have you taken any pictures with white people?
Have I taken photos of... Say that again, love?
Have you taken any pictures with white people?
Oh, yes, I have hundreds of them. Hundreds of them.
What was the reason?
A lot of the times when I'm advocating, heads of churches, world council of churches, they want their photo taken with me as a part of the documentation of their commitment to the struggle. All of those, usually in social justice forums, they get photos taken just for the promotion bit.
Have you ever had sex with a white person?
Yes, my first husband was white. I had 4 children to him.
What are some suggestions of how to unconfuse non-white people about not having sex with white people?
How would I say that again, love?
What are some suggestions of how to unconfuse non-white people about not having sex with white people?
How to unconfuse white people to have non-sex with other white people. Is that what you're asking?
I'm asking because what are some suggestions of how to unconfuse non-white people about not having sex with white people?
I'm not sure I get that question, love. Unless I'm not hearing you correctly, but I'm not sure I actually get that question. Can you rephrase it?
Yes. I'm saying that because non-white people are confused of having a sexual intercourse with white people. So I'm trying to ask how do you unconfuse non-white people about not having any sexual intercourse with white people?
I'm not sure. I mean, the intermarriages over here is a non-issue in Australia. We have a lot of mixed couples that are married, and they're in large numbers here. Something I don't see very often in the U.S., but it is a norm here to cross racial boundaries and marry. Not an issue. But as I said, I don't see it that often over in the U.S. Is that what? Did I answer that right, by the way? Or did I miss the point?
It's okay. That's fine. Do any white people in Australia use the term nigger? And if so, whom are they referencing?
Oh gosh, yes, that's used every day here. We just had a school teacher, by the way, in one of the state schools, tell a class of grade 9 children, which is high school, that the term or the reference nigger is okay to use today to in referencing them Negroes in the US. And the students come home and told me, and I was just appalled, and they had a go at the teacher too, and they said, that's offensive, at least our kids knew enough to be able to correct this person. And to say you cannot use that term. Here, we see it written on walls, we see it in communications, we hear it every day. It's a reference that's used to describe Aboriginal people. We've been called niggers since I can't remember, since we were knee-high to a grasshopper. But it's a term that white supremacists use in defining black people. And, it's continually used here as well.
I don't have any more questions at this time. Thank you for answering my questions. Go to Gus.
No, you're all right, love. Hey, your name, is it Justice?
Yes.
Oh, how did you get that name?
I I don't know. Ever since I've began to do this show, this program, I just thought of it as justice. It's I mean, I don't know. I think because white supremacy is here, but justice isn't. So I really, really like the term justice because justice is better than white supremacy.
Oh, definitely, definitely. That's very prophetic, and that's empowering. God be with you and go with you.
Justice, context of white supremacy. As I said, I'm really hoping that folks who are listening will get a copy of this book, The Great White Flood, Racism in Australia. It is one of the best books that I have read on racism, white supremacy. You will learn a ton, and you'll learn a ton about Australia. So if you're anywhere in the world, you will learn about a totally different part of the planet, and you will learn a lot about the system of white supremacy that you can apply right where you are. It'll really inform you a lot. I really appreciated your critique. This is in the chapter that deals with racism in the Australian church. You have a section that is titled An Aboriginal Womanist Critique of Australian Church Feminism. And you have, this is on page 84. Aboriginal patriarchy is a distortion. In fact, among sub-tribes, the mythical women are even considered the inventors of the rituals and the original owners of the sacred objects. Even more intriguing are the traditions that at the beginning, the ritual objects were discovered and owned by women. Yet, the patriarchal invasion that came to this country still continues today. This goes to show that the invaders could not accept the egalitarian system they encountered because women did not have a role within white society. The newcomers deliberately and completely repressed women's role in the society which they invaded. I really wanted you to spend some time elaborating on that. I thought that was really important, and I hope our listeners grasp the importance of this topic.
Yeah, but Aboriginal society on its traditional makeup, creation stories, a lot of them are founded on women ancestors who were the creators of our songlines, of our country, who were the creators of our law and names and everything. Now, in a lot of our communities where the female was the matriarch, a lot of our communities are matriarchal even to this day. And I can take you into different communities and you can see a patriarchal without me even saying anything. You can see it's patriarchal. Then I can take you in another community where you can see it's totally matriarchal. And even today, with the impact of colonization, a lot of our men were taken and removed from the homes. They were sent away or they were locked up. And women were by themselves and totally vulnerable, raising children and having to work and serve the white people. And basically, women then had to take on the leadership in the home and in the community. And today you'll see all the workers today in the community are the women. Our men have been beaten down. They're either alcoholics or they're drug addicts or they're absentee fathers. They have no role in the home in a lot of cases or in the community, and which is sad because that is also one of those aspects of colonisation. or they're sitting in jail. But in the homes, you've got the community, you've got the women who are running everything, who are making the decisions, who are determining what's going to happen in their community and who's going to deliver that. Today, even today, when we're dealing with the Australian government, which is extremely patriarchal, they still will want to go and pick a man out of our community in which to empower and talk to, rather than talk to strong black women. Because, you know, us strong black women, we don't take no garbage from no one, and we call a spade, and we're direct and we're up front. And if we don't like what you're doing, we'll tell you we don't like it. But with our men, unfortunately as it is, they play the white man game because they're like little Jackie, you know, getting pat on the head and told what a wonderful little boy he is. We've still got too many Uncle Toms. But slowly the women are emerging as a force in this country, and they're really taking their men to toll and making their men accountable or shut up and get back into the community and sit down and be quiet, you know. So they're becoming a force to be reckoned with. And at this organisation I'm heading up, I'm the CEO here, and it is predominantly women who are driving this organisation. And as I said, you know, government has to slowly get used to dealing with women, and they're not silly women. They're quite educated and quite smart. But at the end of the day, we have the interest of the whole community, not just ourselves in our sights. We want everyone to benefit. So through patriarchalism that was brought from the West, and through white feminism, who once again, you know, the white feminist all of a sudden thought she could, as she's struggling for her rights against white patriarchy and talking about the glass ceiling and how they're going to smash it. You know, not once did those white feminists consider any women of colour and how they were going to advance their lot. They have always excluded women of colour. They've never included women of colour, and they're the exclusive little clique that belong to, you know, high level of educated white women, affluent white women. And that's basically what they do. They look after themselves. So I took them on here in Australia, and I told them what I thought of them, and I told them they would no better than their men. They were just as racist as their men, because everything they were fighting for was for only the white women to achieve. There was no elevation or consideration or inclusion of women of colour, whether they be Aboriginal, Filipino, African American, Asian, whatever. But, you know, they ran the exclusive little race. So now, you know, slowly we talk about the womanist movement, which is a black movement around the world. It belongs to women of colour. It belongs to us, where we talk about our movement, which identifies the family, the home, the community, and what needs to be done there, and what opportunities can arise. But also it's acknowledging our men have been beaten, they've been trodden on, and we need to love them, heal them, and build them up again. Not to walk in front of us, but to walk beside us, because together we lead our community. We don't follow. Women don't follow. We're partners in this struggle, and we want to be recognised as partners and not be shuffled to the back bench because it suits them to, you know, be the spokesperson. But, yeah, slowly we're chipping that away. Slowly we're dealing with our men and reminding them about our cultural ways, because within our culture we've got men's business, we've got women's business, but the community can't function without the equal balance of both of those businesses happening. So our leadership's also got to be equal, and it's got to be balanced. So we need to bring that culture and permeate all aspects of our life, not just what we do at community level.
Context of white supremacy. That is a pattern that I've noted. I'm so glad that I have been studying different areas of the world. At least the pattern to me has been sexism and mistreatment of females didn't seem to be as much of a problem until white people came around. That seems to be the pattern that I'm seeing. Have you, at least with the case of Australia, is that accurate with what happened in your area of the world?
Amen, brother, amen. You hit the nail right on the head.
Okay. Right on.
Look at them focusing on China now and Japan and a few other countries. You know, those ones like China is getting economically viable and becoming a force within the globe. So is India, so is Japan. You know, watch how the economics of the U.S. and particularly big business now want to go and hop into bed with these countries in Asia and exploit their labour markets, you know. It's just fascinating to watch all these movements going on because, as you say, white supremacy is live and well and it's still happening.
Wow. You were just, and I mean, this goes hand in hand with abuse of females and emasculation of black males, and again, this should resonate, you know, for black people worldwide. On page 190, this is the section, "The Legacy of Racism." This, you know, I'll just read, and if you could elaborate. You write, "Historical records well document that from the very beginning of white Aboriginal contact, whites sexually enslaved the indigenous men, women, and children of Australia. Whites acted upon their aversive racism and separated themselves from the blacks. They built up missions and reserves and eventually allowed the creation of fringe camps. They enforced all kinds of practices, policies, and even laws to keep blacks in their place, quote unquote, i.e., away from whites. Yet, throughout, whites were forcing sexual contact with Aboriginals. In what appears to be exceedingly irrational behavior, whites curbed their aversion at whim in order to satisfy their sexual drives. White men and women viewed Aboriginals as sexual objects, not as people. Whites from all walks of life, settlers, politicians, government officials, farmers, business owners, and yes, even clergy, forced themselves upon Aboriginal women as well as upon Aboriginal men and children. Further, documentation also exists to show that whites sexually mutilated blacks during the violent European colonization process. There are countless stories of white atrocities against blacks. Rape, genitalia being cut off, spears being inserted into bodies, pause for Abner Louima. Rarely, however, does one find incidents of similar white actions upon other whites. The European colonization process brought much horrific treatment to all people of Australia, but it seems that the horrors were quite uneven, with blacks bearing the brunt of the violence, often sexual violence. Could you elaborate on that passage a bit?
Well, particularly when I talk about, you know, it's well documented. If you in a report called "Bringing Them Home," of children who were taken from their parents. Those children I call the stolen generations earlier, who were taken from their parents and put into institutions run by the church and government. And in those documentations of testimonies by individuals about what had happened to them, they were raped, They were sodomized, they were beaten, they had their genitalia burnt with coals. You name it, that has happened to them in their lifetime. And I'm talking about people who are alive today, as well as those who are deceased. So the so-called pillars of society that white people want to name, streets after, parks after, cathedrals and whatever, are some of these people who committed these atrocities. There is that many clergy who fathered children in black communities who never claimed those children and yet fathered them and then just walked away and left them. Countless numbers. There are those that in the church who use their position of trust and authority to sexually abuse little boys and little girls. What they've done to the lives of these children who are adults now today, still the scars are so deep. Just recently, Australia had an inquiry into the sexual abuse and mistreatment of children in state care. And lo and behold, it didn't include Aboriginals. Isn't that fascinating? It was all about the white kids. And yet, we jumped up and down about, campaigning saying, why doesn't it include us? Because, there would be too many people to be charged. Too many prominent leaders today who would be charged for that sexual abuse. And they don't want that to come out. Slowly we're getting some of it coming to the surface. We in the community know everything. But, to get it out there to media, even media is not interested, because they don't want to, attack their so-called pillars of society and air the dirty laundry, because of the position they've held or still hold. But, one day, and that's what we struggle for each and every day, one day the truth will be told. The truth will come out. And I'll tell you what, when that day comes, there won't be many white pillars of society who can hold their heads up because they are tainted in one way or another in regards to their treatment towards Aboriginal people.
Context of white supremacy. I just wanted to share, this is page 96, talking about the ongoing legacy of racism, white supremacy, and how it is etched in the very fabric of a society. You have a table with examples of racist names currently used in Australian geography. Yep. Black Gin Creek, yep. Blackfellow Creek, yep. Little Gin Creek, yep. Nigger Creek, yep. Darwin, and Townsville. Yep. I don't think folks in the state are as familiar with gin. If you can explain what that term means.
Gin is a derogative term for a black woman. I'm trying to think what would be the same in African American context. It's a derogative name for an Aboriginal woman, put it that way, and it is the most insulting you can call an Aboriginal woman. And that's what I mean. They've got creeks name, Little Gin Creek, still today in this current day and age. I mean, how offensive is that? Yeah.
Wow.
And Townsville is named after, that's in North Queensland. It's a tourist destination. It is a beautiful place, I must say that. But Townsville is named after Robert Townsend, who was the Kanaki slave trader. He, in fact, was responsible for going into the Pacific and enslaving Kanaki people in the Pacific and bringing them back to Australia to work here in the cane fields. And they name a town after him.
Wow. Again, this should not be that big of a surprise. They do the same thing worldwide. Certainly folks in Africa are familiar with Rhodesia and the Rhodes Scholar named after Mr. Cecil Rhodes, certainly no friend of black people. White people, they tend to mark their territory, much like dogs. They tend to mark their territory.
I agree with you.
I wanted to, for me, I had a listener, D, he is one of the co-hosts at Reckless 2.0, also a radio program exclusively focused on racism, white supremacy, and he wanted to know if the indigenous population in Australia, if they reference themselves as black people. And you've been, doing it on the program. It's all in the book. And I was stunned just because normally when I hear people talk about the indigenous population in Australia, they never reference them as black people. So I just, I'm always thinking indigenous, but now it's like, oh, these are black people like me?
Well, we don't even use the term indigenous here. That's a political term used by the Australian government. We use the term Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. And yes, in our own area, when I'm feeling like I'm talking to a black man, so I would use the term black. In our own circles, we'll refer to ourselves as black. Oh, out there we probably will, but we won't allow white people to call us black. They've got to refer to us as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people.
Wow. If a white person does it, it's considered offensive?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Mm. And white people, I'm sorry.
Yeah, but if it's another black person like yourself, we wouldn't take that as an offence. We would take that as identification.
Wow. Okay. Very interesting. Wow.
White people in Australia have always said to me, and why do you align yourself to the African American people when they're not indigenous people to the U.S.? And I said, because their story is so similar to ours. I can understand them because they were slaves like our people were slaves. I said their families were broken up and split up like our families were broken and split up. I said they're black people and the racism that they encounter is the same as what we encounter. I said that we have so much in common that the little we have that is different is neither here nor there. I said, and that's why I can relate to the African American people and understand their plight, because their plight is ours as well. The same as the Native American Indian. I can understand their plight because that's our plight as well. But because of our black skin, we can relate to the African American and all the negativity that goes in association with blackness.
Context of white supremacy. Again, our guest, Dr. Ann Pattel-Gray. If you have some questions you would like to ask, the number to dial 347-215-6071 and press 1 and I'll get your question in. I did want to ask, this is also chapter The Legacy of Racism. This is on page 194, because I think, as you just said, white people have done a lot of the same things to black people in this area of the world, the States, and I wanted you to elaborate on this. You were writing, you said, whites actively encouraged specific behavior in blacks to perpetuate the racist oppression. For example, whites conceived and empowered the formation of the Native Police, a unit of the white police that often was used in hunting parties to track down certain Aboriginal people who whites considered needed to be apprehended. Whites actively encouraged Aboriginal men to join the Native Police and thus to contribute to this newly established civilization, in quotes. The truth, however, is that the Native Police was one of the most ruthless and violent tools of white colonial Australia. Can you talk about that, the strategy of getting non-white people to participate?
What happened with the Native Police, for example, I'm in Queensland, and if someone went missing here, you know, a radical or whatever, because remember, we're all locked up, and we're supposed to be doing our work for the white man. If one went missing, they would go to, say, South Australia, which is another state, and another group of Aboriginal people, and they would take the best black trackers from from South Australia, and they would threaten them that they would never see their family again, or they would hurt their children or their wife unless they did this. So in order to, you know, look after the welfare of their children, they were forced into doing this, and they became Native Police. That's how they were referenced. And they were the best black trackers that existed, in the sense that they could track any animal, human being through the bush. And that's why they were used. And they were used to find these missing Aboriginal people and bring them back into custody. Some of them, you know, quite often the different Aboriginal groups used to go out on hunting parties, and they would actually go and kill white settlers as a payback for something that they had done, you know, like poison the waterhole and kill so many hundreds of their own people and things like that. And they would go and get these Native Police in and then track down these people and kill them. They didn't go voluntary. They were threatened. If they didn't participate as Native Police, they would either be killed or wouldn't see their family or whatever. So it's something like what we talk about, your Uncle Toms, you know, the big, the snitch, you know, betrays your people. These were those sort of people. We refer to black bureaucrats today that work in the government as Native Police. We reckon it is an extent they're still there functioning for the government, the white man.
Wow. Let's see, we have, looks like 4 people that dialed in with questions. Wow. I think we even have someone who called in from Australia.
True. How fascinating. I'd love to hear. I bet you it was a white person.
Let's find out. The person who called in, I believe this is the Australia country code. Your line is open. Are you there?
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
All right. I have a question. I have 3 questions, actually. I wanted to find out, can you please tell us about how the system of white supremacy uses other non-white people to further disenfranchise Aboriginal people? 2, may you please tell us about the government intervention? And 3, Kevin Rudd said, sorry for the past abuses. May you please explain to us why this is a hollow apology?
No problem. The government uses other non-white people to disenfranchise Aboriginal people, basically because non-white people who immigrate to this country, who aren't Aboriginal people, are easy weapons to use against us, because they compromise our position, they undermine our position, and they take our jobs. In many of the Aboriginal departments that you will see in Australia, the majority of workers in there are either white or non-Aboriginal. Very few Aboriginal people are working in these departments, and yet they're making policies and legislations over Aboriginal people with no consultation. So that's how they continue to disenfranchise us, because we are still not at the table. We still are not making the decisions in regards to our life, nor are we being consulted. In regards to Kevin Rudd's apology, how that was a hollow apology, no, I admire Kevin Rudd for the apology that he made to the stolen generations. However, they're only acknowledging one very small portion of our history, and that's the stolen generations. That's the children they stole. What about all the atrocities of what they committed? The slavery, the theft of land, the cultural genocide, being put into compounds and missions. You know, the fact that, that apology didn't relate to me in the sense it related to my grandparents and that, because they were stolen gen. But I felt that the Australian government should have apologised for the whole of the history, not just one very small section of that history. The reason Kevin Rudd's apology was hollow is that Aboriginal people would say it was hollow, is the fact that it wasn't inclusive of the whole history. Two, there was no compensation or restitution that went with that apology. So it was only merely words on paper. There was no compensation, no rectification, certainly no justice that came back to the Aboriginal people who were victims of those policies. In regards to the federal government's intervention in the Northern Territory, that in itself is absolutely appalling. To suspend the Racial Discrimination Act in order to come in and take control of Aboriginal people's lives, their money, and every aspect of their life. You may as well turn the clock back, 50 years, because you're back under the protection days where Aboriginal people had no rights. That's appalling what this government has done. I mean, the federal government did that under Howard government, but Labor government haven't done anything to rectify the situation. And that's why Aboriginal people are very angry about that circumstances. If anything, they see the Labor government as probably the only government that advocates for Aboriginal people in any capacity. However, that's not the game today. The federal government is taking the position, it's taken the middle ground that the poor old rights, the Liberals don't even know where to go now. They're out in the left field because the Labor government has taken their position. It's ultra-conservative. It is disempowering to think that we're in 2011 and Aboriginal rights are being suspended. It's appalling, and yet the UN has done nothing about it. They've come and investigated. It's a big line. It's a toothless line. And Australian people on a whole aren't offended.
Thank you very much. I have one more question. Do you think...
hang on one second. I wanted to ask, are you a white person?
Me?
No.
Oh, the gentleman on the line I was asking. That's called in.
Oh.
Are you a non-white person?
No, I'm not.
What is your... Are you white or are you not white?
I'm not white.
Not white. Okay. Where are you calling from, if I may ask?
Rather not say.
Okay. Okay. No worries.
One last question. Do you think Aboriginal people or people from the U.S. or other abused peoples should form some sort of organization to seek compensation?
That is a tough question. I don't like to talk for other people, and particularly other countries. If it is their interest to do such a thing, then I would, and they invited us to support them, I would see us wanting to do that. But I think, yes, I think there needs to be. I mean, if we're going to go forward in any form of enlightenment and build a country that is truly multicultural and that stands on the representation of equality of all humanity, then we've got to start addressing our past, because that informs our present, and that will inform our future as well. So if we can't begin to be, big enough to look at the mistakes we've made and say, those things were wrong, we need to change the way we do things. We need to change bureaucracies. We need to change, legislation and whatever in order to allow Aboriginal people to have the full benefits of Western society, then that's going to make a difference. But compensation in some forms for those traumatic things that were done in the past need to be rectified, need to be conciliated, need to be restituted. Restitution needs to be put into place, because otherwise we can't go forward.
The gentleman who dialed in with the question, hang tight. I'm going to definitely come back to see if you want to share anything else. I just want to see if I can get a couple other questions in. But hang tight, sir, if you are able. Person who called in, your handle is showing as Tech Knowledge. Tech Knowledge. Did you have a question for Dr. Ann Pattel-Gray?
Yes, sir, Gus. This is Derek. This is D from Reckless. I wanted to ask Dr. Patel if there were, I know white people practice racism by dehumanizing non-white people and presenting stereotypes against that particular non-white group. Are there any existing stereotypes about black people in Australia that are kind of commonplace?
Yes, there are. There are many stereotypes, but the common ones that are quite often portrayed in media and are spoken from the lips of white people is that we're drunks, we're no-hopers, we're dirty, we're filthy, we're lazy, we don't work, we're uneducated, and we're criminals. They would be the common basis.
Oops, sorry about that. I didn't hear. D, if you want to repeat that, sorry. Your line should be open. You want to repeat that, D?
Oh, I just said thank you for answering my question, Dr. Patel.
You're welcome.
See, person who dialed in from a blocked number. Did you have a question? Person who dialed in from a blocked number.
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Greetings. Fantastic program. Dr. Gray, I've been interested in Aboriginal people since I was young, and I remember reading something some years ago about the descendants of black males in that country, some type of influx of black males into that country, and it was said that a lot of the Aboriginal people are descendants from black people. Do you know anything about that?
Well, actually, the whole migration myth, the European migration myth, has recently been turned on its head. In fact, they found skeletal remains in the U.S. dating back 10,000 years and identified them as Aboriginal people from Australia. So the ANU, Australian National University here, in conjunction with the university in the U.S., are rewriting, because of what they're finding, the whole European myth of migration around the world. In fact, they're saying that it could be that humanity began with Aboriginal people, not what they originally thought it being African, because they said at this point everything that they're finding of Aboriginal people archaeologically and everything else are predating African existence.
Yeah, I'm familiar with that. I'm not talking about the so-called Y chromosome, whatever they call it, the migration or whatever. I'm talking about, I don't know if it was during slavery, during the slave trade, or exactly what, but I'm talking about a more recent influx of black people into the country.
Okay.
Yeah, someone wrote a book on it, and I just can't find it anywhere. I have to do more research. I've been looking and I can't find it. But your thoughts?
Were they making a reference to Kanakis or South Sea Islanders?
I'm not sure. But
okay.
It's not something that's readily. I don't think it's really been brought out fully. I just think that they might have done some. I think it might have been some type of DNA testing that they've done, but they were just. I don't know. I just thought maybe you would had some knowledge on that.
No, I don't. I'm sorry. I'll certainly look into that, but I do not know of anything recent.
Okay, thanks for coming on the show. And one quick question: Is there a segment of the Aboriginal population that are kind of secluded, not so much in the cities, that aren't mixing with white people? They're keeping their culture. I've read a lot about the spirituality of Aboriginals and how strong that is, and what they're finding out about the dream lines. Yes. Just wondering, is that being preserved?
Very much so. Aboriginal people are found all over this continent. There's some that live in this urban, there is the rural, and there is the remote. And our spirituality is very much still alive and well and being maintained and practiced.
Okay. Thank you, 909. Appreciate the questions. Other person who dialed in from a blocked number. Did you have a question for Dr. Ann Pattel-Gray? The other person who dialed in from a blocked number, did you have a question? Okay. Not hearing you. Not sure if you're having difficulties with your line or if you're muted, but yeah, we made an attempt. Sorry about that. Let's see. Non-Mighty Way, did you have a question for Dr. Ann Pattel-Gray?
Yes, thanks for taking my call. Thanks for coming on the program, Doctor. It's been very informative. I just want to make sure I heard you correct. Did you use the term Lil Jackie or Little Jackie in reference to?
Yeah, Little Jackie.
Okay. Where's that term come from, or can you give me information? Do you know anything about that term?
It's a term that was developed here in Australia. It's a derogative term towards an Aboriginal person that, you know how the African American have the term boy? Well, Little Jackie is the same sort of term. He's a go-getter and a fetcher for white people.
All right, thank you very much. That's all I had. I appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
Let's see. The person who dialed in, last four digits, 9674. 9674. Did you have a question for Dr. Ann Pattel-Gray?
Yes, I did. Greetings, Dr. Pattel-Gray.
Greetings.
Listening to the show, so much of or what you were saying, so much of it on the history of Australia and what white people have done to black people there is very disturbing to me. And I wanted to say it's confusing in a way, but it's not, because I see it in black people here. But I wanted to ask you, after all of the things that white people have done to the black people of Australia, including rape, genocide, mutilation, violence, bastardizing them, taking the children, why do you think at this point, with that knowledge, and I'm assuming people in Australia are much more knowledgeable of that history in detail than a lot of black Americans are of things done to us here today. We tend not to like to talk about them. Why do you think that with all of that history and knowledge of it, that black people in Australia would still willingly marry and go to bed and have sex with white people and reproduce children with them?
I love it. I think one of the things that, and I can understand where you're coming from, one of the biggest problems that we have is that within the society, because of the stolen generations and our people being taken and put and separated, a lot of us don't know who our relatives are to begin with. We quite often find cases of where brothers and sisters have married each other, only to find that out 10 years after they married and after 5 kids and so on. So we see, the continual devastation and breaking of families because all those historical records have been destroyed by the white government and things like that. In a lot of cases, we're a minority also within this country, and I believe that we began to marry white people at the beginning as a way of getting free from the Act, because we were under what they called the Protection Act, and the only way we could be free of the Act was to marry people who weren't under the Act, and of course that was white people. And a lot of our men and women married white people to get free of the Act, because the Act was so oppressive that they would do that just to get free. From there, we've got so many mixed races. We've got Chinese, we've got Pacific Islanders, because the Chinese were brought here also as slaves, and therefore they lived with us, so they ended up marrying in. You've got also the Afghanis were brought in here as the camel traders, and of course marginalised like us, and therefore they married in. So we're so mixed race as well, even though we're staunchly Aboriginal. If we had more black men here to marry, we would. A lot of our men were incarcerated, a lot of them dead or drunks. Very, very hard to find good black men. I would have gladly married an Aboriginal man if there was one that I knew wasn't related to me and wasn't a drunk or been in jail, and who was prepared to work and care for his family. Unfortunately, that wasn't the realm when I was growing up. That didn't exist. Today, maybe you can send some of your black men over here who can marry some of our black women. Just not enough of them here to marry, and so a lot of integration carries on here. It is a mixed pool here, and it's something that's never been frowned upon. Aboriginal people have never been... when we were taken out of the missions, our houses were split amongst Western society in the low economic area, of course. So we never lived in suburbs that were all Aboriginal. It didn't exist. They broke us up. And I suppose in some ways it's a result of being beaten down. You assimilate in some aspects, but at the same time trying to fight for your identity. There's no other explanation I can give. I would say everyone would have different explanations, but basically I think it was to get out from underneath the Act is one of those things.
The caller 1067, open your line up. I just wanted to point out for listeners, sounds like white people tailoring an environment that will encourage non-white people to engage in sexual intercourse with white people. You'll be treated better, better benefits. That also sounds very familiar, unfortunately. Person who dialed in 1067, your line is up.
Right. Hi, Gus. How you doing? Dr. Pattel-Gray, my name is Charles Brooks International. I have a question, and it relates to a study that was done while at Columbia University in New York around 1986 and so forth. And one of the doctoral students came in from Australia to give his study, and he was engaged in a campaign of extermination of Aborigines. Do you know anything about that, and can you share some light on that?
Yes, that's what I was saying. Where back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, it was the intent of the invaders, Western invaders, white invaders, to exterminate Aboriginal people. They poisoned water holes. They poisoned flour, sugar, and tea, and gave them to Aboriginal people because they were starving, because the farmers and everything had pushed their the animal world that they hunted further back. As the whites come in, they went further afield. So food was lacking, and plus with the introduction of all the Western diseases that came, there was a lot of illness that was happening at the time as well. And there were, in fact, hunting parties that were split by the British soldiers and farmers who went out on hunting parties to shoot Aboriginal people at will. And that went on for a good decade or more in this country. And once again, that is very much documented in Australian history as well. Yes, so that is factual, and that is true.
We are almost at the bottom of the hour. I wanted to double check to see if Justice, do you have any more questions you would like to ask?
Yes. What websites do you know that talk about racism, white supremacy in Australia?
Sorry, I missed the first part of your question, love.
What websites do you know that talk about racism, white supremacy in Australia?
Probably, I don't know of any. It's a hidden element here within our society. Australia likes to believe it is non-racist. It's, you might find a few here and there, but it's like looking in a needle in a haystack. Anything that would identify Australia as racist, they don't want to look at it.
If you have offspring, how do you help your offspring learn and understand racism, white supremacy?
My children have grown up under my leadership and my nurturing. They've been very involved in watching their mother protest, go to marches. I organised a march in 1988 of 50,000 people, Aboriginal people and white people, who marched against the 200th celebration of Australia. And my children were very proud and very much a part of that process. I've done a lot of education in schools, in universities, in government, teaching people what it is to be Aboriginals, about our history, trying to build bridges to create a more enlightened society that would have better understanding on Australian history, and particularly what they've done to Aboriginal people in Australia, to look at how we move forward in a different way, you know. So my children had taken up my banner, and they're doing the same thing that their mother's doing. Probably not at my level yet, but they're working their way there. But very staunch, very radical about, you know, what needs to be done. But they bring their own personalities to the front in regards to how they present issues. But it's something that we hand on to every generation because the fight must continue.
I've never seen a koala before, and I do know that koalas live in Australia. So how do the koalas get treated in Australia? Have you ever saw and or touched one? And do koalas receive better treatment than the Aboriginal people there?
Unfortunately, no. They don't get as much. They don't even get treated any better than what we do. If Australia doesn't do something about it, they'll be extinct in the next decade. Their forests have been cut down, their trees, the gums that they particularly eat, because of the farmers, because of industry, you know, eroding into their areas. We've got very little national parks now where our koalas live. Most of them now you'll find in habitats where they're being looked after in native habitats or zoos or whatever. Very few in the wild because they're considered as a nuisance by a lot of people, you know, and when government makes decisions about, you know, economics, unfortunately the almighty dollar wins over the life span of a koala. So yes, it's very sad when we consider some of our icons are slowly depleting, and you know, once again we're at the loggerheads with government about their care and their welfare, and that's a battle in itself. Mm.
And have you ever saw
or yes, I've nursed koalas, yes, and I've held them and fed them and everything. They are a beautiful animal, but they are also very dangerous if you don't know what you're doing, because they can rip you right open. But they are beautiful, absolutely beautiful to watch. They're a unique animal, and because they're marsupials, and yeah, it would be a tragedy for us to not have them become extinct, because you know, there's something I think the world should be able to share and enjoy. Mm.
Yeah, I feel you. I don't have any more questions for the guests at this time, or yeah, and yeah, I think koalas are great animals, and you know, and I think white people are the problem for mistreating these animals, and I think white people, you know, should do way better than that, but you know, I doubt it. And I like animals, and yeah.
Yes. Well, like Aboriginal people, see, we coexist in our creation, in our environment, and we're not driven by a Western ideology of land as a commodity to be bought and sold. Land to us is spiritual. It is a part of our humanity. It's a part of our being. It's who we are. And I think the West can learn a lot from its Indigenous people around the world, particularly on how to coexist with creation.
Yeah, and thank you for coming on this program, program, and yeah, and I hope maybe we can have you back on again.
I would be more than happy to do that, and thank you so very much, Justice.
Context of white supremacy. Before we let you go, I did want to ask. I want to ask about films, but one thing, I've watched quite a bit of the Williams sisters, Serena and Venus, play Serena Williams, she's won the Australian Open 5 times, and I've seen her play, and it's really fascinating to see this one black person in a crowd of all these white people. How do they respond? Have there ever been any incidents? How do they respond to her coming down and winning that tournament so many times?
They don't have a lot of nice things to say about them. If I can be derogative for one moment, this will summarise how white Australia sees them. And then niggers don't know their place.
Whoa. You've heard white people say that about them?
They don't say that, but that's the attitude they portray. Because, as far as they're concerned, black people shouldn't even be there.
Wow.
Very negative. They always they always show them in a very trivial pursuit, like doing fashion or this or that, and there's always a tongue-in-cheek twist to any comment that's made about them. It really aggravates me. They're so disrespectful. And I often wonder if the U.S., the African American community, ever see some of that media that's portrayed here of them, because it is offensive. They trivialise them, especially their achievements. Their accomplishments are just significant.
Wow. I haven't seen any of it, but if it's online, I would love to view it. If it's on YouTube or on any website, I would love to get an opportunity to see some of it.
I'll have a look and see what I can find for you. The other thing is, if you email me your address, I'll send you a couple of videos over that show you Australian history. It documents the whole history. It'll fool you.
Wow. Yes, I will do it immediately, and I'll share with listeners too. I'll share whatever information I get. That sounds I'm ecstatic. Yes, I'll do it immediately.
No problem.
Before we wrap up, I wanted to ask if you knew of any films that would be constructive for people to learn more about the history of Australia, racism, white supremacy.
That's what I'm going to send you. I'm going to send you the DVDs of the history, so you can see a visual and you can tell people about them. Okay.
Outstanding. Rabbit Proof Fence, I've seen that. That's an excellent one.
Look, Rabbit Proof Fence, it glorified the bloody missions. It never showed you the abuse that those kids received. It just swept it all underneath the carpet. It was not a factual story, because if they were actually showing you the abuse, it would have been absolutely horrific. It's courageous in the sense of these children finding their way home, but it didn't give you a true view of what the treatment that children received in those missions.
Wow. Rabbit Proof Fence watered down.
Watered down.
Okay.
We were very disappointed with it, yeah. But see, anything to do with our history here, black history here in Australia, has to be sugar-coated enough for white people to even swallow it, let alone digest it. So you'll always have it sugar-coated.
Wow.
But the DVDs I'm going to send you, not sugar-coated.
I'm looking forward. It's in your book, Having the Courage to Confront White Supremacy Head On. Please get the book. The title again, The Great White Flood, Racism in Australia, written by Dr. Ann Pattel-Gray. Thoroughly enjoyed having you on the program, learned a ton, and we would definitely love to have you back on the program if you think it would be a constructive investment of your time.
No problem. I would be more than happy, because this is what I do. Try to educate people, try to connect with people. I'm more than happy to come back.
Wow. Thank you again. I will get you my address as soon as the program wraps up. And again, I hope people will get the book and learn more. You can learn a whole lot about the system of white supremacy just studying what happened in Australia. Again, Dr. Ann Pattel-Gray. Please enjoy the rest of your Monday, and we'll be in touch with you soon.
God bless, and I'll hear from you soon. Thanks so much, Gus.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Context of white supremacy. Live from Australia, and I'm going to say that again just for the record. C.O.W.S, we had our weekend world tour Friday. We had from the area of the world known as Nigeria, Majamet Jaboro, from the area of the world known as Nigeria. He agreed, yes, global system of white supremacy, definition is accurate. Yesterday, Saturday, we had Dr. William Les Henry, black male, area of the world known as England, agreed, yes, global system of white supremacy, definition is accurate. Dr. Pattel-Gray, Australia, agreed, global system of white supremacy, definition accurate. Marinate on that doesn't mean anything. That's just, that could be four people who are all confused, who got together and, exchanged views on confused ideas that are not true. Maybe that's the case. I don't think so. Marinate on it, and we'll be right back. I think we have news from Justice, and then as long as the switchboard cooperates, we will get the phone lines and you can share thoughts. I'm curious to hear what people had to say about racism, white supremacy in Australia. We'll be right back. Context of white supremacy.
Is racism hurting you? On issues of race, are you unable to speak, think, and act with clarity and confidence? Are you tired of laughing when nothing is funny, smiling when you are not happy, agreeing when you really disagree? At counterracism.com, you can learn specific strategies and techniques to counter the behaviors of the people who practice racism in all areas of activity, using words correctly, following counter-racist logic, even counter-racist science projects designed to reveal what racism is, how it works, and how to counter it. The open-source code writing format allows you to pick and choose from a variety of counter-racist suggestions so you can produce the code that works for you. Stop by counterracism.com today and help replace racism with justice.
That's counter-racism.com.
Hello everybody, welcome to the C.O.W.S. This is Justice here at Blog Talk Radio. If you want to learn, listen, understand, and question, go to blogtalkradio.com/victim-of-racism, and for more information on racism and white supremacy, go to my blog, justdojusticetoday.blogspot.com. My email address is justice.asap@yahoo.com. Replace white supremacy with justice, ASAP. You're just saying just buckets and buckets of words.
Context of white supremacy. I want to thank, before we go to Justice, for our news segment. Thank you to Khadijah, a longtime listener, investor of the C.O.W.S. She suggested Dr. Pattel-Gray long time ago, before we even were having, people from other parts of the globe on the program regularly. She recommended her, and I was finally able to follow through and get her on the program. And I hope everyone found something constructive from her visit, because I think she has a lot of great information. Her book, super informative. I mean, she gives detailed accounts of how racism, white supremacy is practiced in all areas of activity. Phenomenal work. I would highly recommend it. It is one of the most informative books that I have read on racism, white supremacy. I mean, it's way up there in constructive value. That said, we are about to probably before the next time we broadcast, we will have collected our first 250,000 listens at Blog Talk Radio. I don't know how many total listens we have because the program is syndicated. We're played on other radio programs, so I don't really know how many total listens, but just here at Blog Talk Radio, looks like we're going to go over 250,000 listens before the next broadcast. That's not an accomplishment, not Watermelon Day on the Plantation, just recognizing that it looks like that is about to be a black ink fact, and hopefully it will continue. And hopefully that means we're moving in the correct direction. If it's mostly non-white people listening and they're becoming less confused, hopefully their will to figure out what to do to replace white supremacy with justice immediately will increase exponentially. Also want to encourage folks, please invest to get Dr. Cambon back on the program. Earmark the investment with what you want to contribute to Dr. Cambon. Definitely want him back on the program ASAP. He's willing to speak with us, and I think he's a lot less confused. Would have a lot of great information to share. If we can make that happen, I want to compensate him for his time and energy. So let's supporting a black male, and reminding folks Dr. Cambon and his influence on the program.
Our people are very serious about not being very serious. Meanwhile, white people are very serious about playing hardball against us, and this hardball is called genocide.
For sure. Justice, if you're there and you have some news items for us, please feel free.
I do, and this one is from Siffy.com, and it was posted on March 15th this year, 2011, and the title is Racism in Australia Gets Similar to United States Deep South, Johnny Lee Clary. And I believe that we interviewed him, Gus. He's a member. He's actually a leader of the Ku Klux Klan, and yeah, a former Ku Klux Klan leader has said that racism in Australia has reached a similar intensity to what he saw in the United States Deep South. Johnny Lee Clary, a former KKK leader, said that prejudice and hatred down under ran deeper than most people care to admit. I've been coming to Australia for 12 years, and I see just as much racism here as I have in America. A lot of people in Australia like to pretend that it doesn't exist, but it does. The Telegraph quoted him as saying, Ku Klux Klan is the name of the three distinct organizations in the United States, which have advocated extremist, reactionary currents such as white supremacy, white nationalism, and anti-immigration, historically expressed through terrorism. Earlier, Clary was the leader of KKK, but he left the organization and became a church minister. Presently, Clary is in Port Stephens to speak to school children about his life and how he came to realize that racism and prejudice are wrong. His statement sheds light on the increasing racism in Australia. The recent acts of racism against Indians in Australia have resulted protests in both the nations, A and I. And I don't have any thoughts directly, but because I already interviewed this guy, and so I would suggest to go back in the archives, Johnny Lee Clary on the cows. So my thoughts and questions will be on that program.
Wow, that's kind of hilarious. Said those archives at the cows are kind of extensive. We are slowly encroaching on our 400th broadcast. Yeah, Johnny Lee Clary, he was on in September of 2009. I remember him talking about his affinity for the Jeffersons. He said he liked the Jeffersons even when he was an active member of the Klan. He still enjoyed the Jeffersons. He said that he mentioned that on the program. Go back in the archives, September 2009. Wow, and I remember him saying that he had like a following in Australia and that he'd been there. Like I remember him talking about that. That's yeah, world system of white supremacy for sure, for sure.
And he also said that like he was trying to say, well, you know, I'm not racist. But yeah, like he kept trying to say I'm not racist, but you know he's a member of the Ku Klux Klan. I mean, he's a leader, and I mean, he's white. I mean, you can easily tell that he's a racist. I mean,
I think he says now that he is an ex-KKK member. Like he says he doesn't do that anymore, and that he's an evangelical minister, which I think is quite interesting because the Klan also alleges to be a quote-unquote Christian and religious organization. But yeah, that's he's quite a character, Johnny Lee Clary.
Yeah.
Lee Clary. Did you have anything else on that story?
Nope. I just want to say that Johnny Lee Clary is a leader of the Ku Klux Klan, and you know he's a racist white supremacist.
Yeah, I don't think he's a current leader. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I don't think he's a current leader. No worries. Former leader.
Was.
Yeah. Did you have another report you were going to share, or?
No, just one.
Oh, okay. Groovin'. Definitely appreciate the news segments, keeping folks informed. Again, if you're paying attention, you will see racism, white supremacy in the news all the time. I mean, it will just be popping, and worldwide. You don't have to confine your search to any particular area of the world. With that, the folks that dialed in that had a hand up, Non-Mighty Wick, 909 818 D from Reckless 2.0, and Mr. Nero, your lines are open. Do you have any thoughts on the program, Dr. Ann Pattel-Gray, anything that you heard? Not hearing anyone. Let's see. D. Record. Oh, okay. Yes, sir.
My line was muted. Sorry about that. It was good hearing her. It was good hearing from a Aboriginal, an Australian. I've been studying those people for. I'm not studying. Yeah, I guess I've been kind of studying them. I don't know, this sounds kind of weird, but like they're some type of object, but I have been interested in the Aboriginals since I was young, so yeah, it was good to hear from her. I remember wondering when I was younger if they would ever figure out that white people were the problem. I just seen a lot of confusion, you know, when I was looking at them, it just seemed like there was a lot of confusion, and you know, of course, you know, because of all of the damage that had been done to them, and I remember wondering as a teenager if they would, you know, figure out that white people were a major problem. So. Yeah, it was definitely good to hear from her. I really like those people. They're a lot like she was saying, the Native American. I mean, they're like us. You know, they're like us in a lot of ways. I always found them very beautiful people, and it's just I've been reading a lot about Australia and the Aboriginal people, and white people are just it's just sick how they treat them and the things that they do to non-white people, and just reading that stuff is it can be disheartening, but hearing her, even though I think she said she had 4 children with whatever, but it was just good to hear her. It was a excellent program, I think.
Gus, I think the day that was going for the Chosen show, I think it was going to be on Easter, I believe. Is that correct, Gus?
I hadn't set a specific date, so I can't say that I had set a specific date or time for the program, but if you would like to have it on Easter, so-called Easter Sunday, I believe that's April 24th, that is cool with me.
Okay, Easter, and then I guess we'll set a time. I don't know what time, but yeah.
Okay. So that would be April 24th, Sunday, April 24th. That is so-called Easter Sunday, and I'm thinking afternoonish. I guess it depends if there are non-white children who are not in the States, UK area, other places. I guess we could make it in the afternoon, early afternoon. That way, if they're non-white children who are outside the States who want to participate, we could include them as well. But we should have enough time to plan all that out for time. So we at least have a date nailed, April 24th, Sunday, and we'll get a time. Shoot me an email, and just let me know if you're interested in participating. Non-white children, 9 and up, should be Constructive. What's the film we're supposed to watch?
Hotel for Dogs. Not Hotel for Dogs 2, but just Hotel for Dogs.
Alrighty. Announcement again. So anyone out there with, non-white children, there you go. Get them out. Get the word out. 909, I think he said he had been in contact with some non-white children. Get the word out, see if they might be interested. I don't know anybody else out there. And if you were on the program previously, any of the non-white children, the 5th grader that called in, all the folks that were on for the quote-unquote Christmas Eve broadcast, please, we would love to have you back on for the broadcast in April. So, shoot me an email if you're interested. Or Justice.
And this whole program sounded eerily familiar. I mean, I think 909 nailed it. I mean, it's like a fusion between the so-called Native Americans and, black people in America.
I got a lot of thoughts, man, just rattling through my head. I mean, really on the just the commonality, and I guess I'll just say, even though I don't know if this is absolutely true, I don't really know. It just seems like the brutality that they do. I for some reason, and like I said, this might not be true, but it seems like they do it to the more brutal. It seems like the people just seem to be very strong, very beautiful, very spiritual people that they have to just, I guess they just hate that the most, or they just have some type of serious hate for that, because from what I've studied, it seems like the most powerful, a lot of powerful people that they just brutalized, that had connection with nature. You know, they understood. I mean, if you understand the Aboriginal spiritual system, if you look at the landscape, they had carved out in the land these what they call dream lines, and it's in their art. And these white people, they didn't understand it. They didn't want to understand it. But now, white people are finding out that these lines that the Aboriginals had carved out are basically water systems with pure water, highly magnetic areas. I mean, you know what I mean? They knew what they were doing. They had like a high understanding of the land, and you know, to be just but it's like now that they're like, oh yeah, there's fresh water under here. There's, you know, there's high energy lines. I mean, you know, they're like taking the information and now basically, you know, doing their new wave. You know, they acting like they're the natives of the land. You know, they have all this information now. You know, oh, we need to take care of the land, blah blah blah. It's just sickening, man. I mean, they're acting like, I mean, there's hippies all over Australia, man. You know, doing meditations on these lines and all this, like they really have. Now they want to be connected. I mean, after you done, you know, devastated the people, now you want to act like you're Aborigine. It's crazy.
Yeah, they do that with the so-called Native American too, and they even try to take their lineage and say, "Oh, I'm Native American." I've seen suspected racists pull that one often.
And I would like to say too that they have control over the information. There's a whole history that's been lost. There's a history of black people being in Australia. I'm not exactly sure if it was during the slave trade. It might have been during the slave trade or sometime after it. But there was an influx of black people into that country. I guess, you know, the cheap labor, and a lot of those Aboriginals, they are black. I mean, they call themselves black, but they're descendants of of black people, and they have no idea about it because the history is kept from them. So, you know, white people, they have the history. They have the history on lock. And it's just, she brought out a lot of the history, and I read another book that was breaking out the history, but there's so much history that hasn't been brought out yet. I mean, so much. I just find it interesting that they had just on that piece right there. I mean, information is important, and if you don't have information, it just makes it that much harder. I mean, she was talking about, like, it's possible to marry your own sister. You have no ties with your family and whatnot. Man. and her, she said, I could have married my brother, and Gus, I think he said that kind of sets up an environment to where you would want to have sex with a white person, because now the fear is that you might.
I'm sorry, I've been muting my phone because it's just incredibly noisy in here. But if you look back in our own history here, our ancestors went through the same thing after the so-called Emancipation Proclamation, going around trying to find family members and relatives that had been sold off and not knowing who was a relative and who wasn't.
Oh, it's way, thank you. Like, it is way loud. Thank you for the input, though.
I had a feeling that she wouldn't like that movie Rabbit Proof Fence.
You know what I wanted to ask her? It was, God, I'm sorry, it's just noise all around, even outside or in. But I wanted to ask her if she had seen the Oprah Winfrey Show when Oprah went to her Australian adventure. Because what I noticed watching the show, everyone that Oprah Winfrey went to surprise or see while she was there, it was all the white people. She kept talking about how wonderful Australia was, how it was the best vacation she's ever taken in her life, how the Aussie people are this, the Aussie people are that. She started speaking in their lingo. She was showing up at white people's houses in Australia, surprising them at parties. She even gave one white woman in Australia who had been a viewer on her show a surprise baby shower in Australia. And the one time I did see them go to see any Aboriginal people, so-called Aboriginal people, they went to this sacred rock, this big, huge formation. I forget the name of it. But they went there, and it was just so appalling to me because instead of actually looking at how the Aboriginal people live, it was kind of like they were circus sideshows. Like, attractions. She took a group of women from her viewers that she took on the trip to Australia. They went to this sacred place, which I feel like it's a desecration. I don't think white people should even be there at this point in their sacred places, because she's taken white people along with a few non-white people who were in her group to this thing. And it was the Aboriginal black females, and they had traditional paint on and whatever they do for this ceremony. So they were showing how they performed the ceremony, but no mention was made of how they've been treated, of what's being done to them. And basically everything that Oprah Winfrey showed you of Australia other than that was white people. And it just looked like Australia is white people's land, and like it's always been that way. And but Australia is so wonderful and beautiful, and they're the most welcoming people in the world, but forget how they basically commit genocide, against the black people there. But like no mention of it. It was just noticeably absent. And then if you go on YouTube and you type in Chelsea lately, and Rihanna, the singer, put those words in a YouTube search, you'll find Rihanna's interview on the Chelsea Handler show while Chelsea Handler was broadcasting from Australia. And in that, Rihanna talks about the absence of black people there, how she hardly sees any, but when she does, they're so black. So it's like Rihanna's not black herself, but she's marveling at how black the black people there are. And Chelsea Handler's cracking jokes on black people, and and it always has to be something sexual in there. But if you watch the Oprah Winfrey Show in Australia, I suggest watching that and then watching Chelsea Handler, watching that episode after listening to today's program. And just see how it all hits you.
Yeah, I for one was disgusted when I heard that Oprah was going over there to do all these shows, and then that Jay-Z was going over there perform. I was really disgusted because
And on that show that I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, go ahead. I was just going to would think people would stand on principle.
But you got to think these are black people who are millionaires and most likely making their money working with racist suspects or with white supremacists. So, yeah. I don't see them taking a stand against anything unless white people are taking a stand against it. Like when Jay-Z went down there, he surprised the school, which was predominantly non-white children. They talked about how poor these children were and underprivileged. It's the same story everywhere, where you have non-white children in a society run by white people. They're going to be underprivileged. They're going to lack resources. So he got them all laptops. Huh?
Still slipping the word privilege in there, aren't they?
Yeah. Underprivileged is what they call them. Not, of course, not victims of racism, because Australians are so wonderful, the Aussies. But so he got them all laptops, and they were all overjoyed, and he came in their school and surprised them. But it was just noticeable to me when I'm watching this, I'm seeing their Asian, so-called Asian children, black children, and whatever else, but everybody was non-white in this so-called underprivileged school. And in my mind, I'm saying it begs the question, why are these the underprivileged children in this so wonderfully wonderful place of Australia that Oprah loves so much? You know, consistently everywhere we go, those who lack and are without resources and have the least are non-white people. And I'm just kind of getting sick of seeing black people going places and working with white people to organize these, you know, so-called acts of charity, but not speaking about the problem being white people and the system of racism, white supremacy. I guess it's pointless. I mean, they can use the computers, but it's pointless to throw trinkets at them if you're not going to solve the problem. Unless the point is to placate them and confuse non-white people to think, oh, look, there's progress, white people are doing something, or, you know, black people get help too, but we don't get justice.
Throwing them extra biscuits on the table.
I was just really pissed off listening to the program today, honestly. I really was. Because it's the same story everywhere. And I wanted to say, how can the black people in Australia be that confused, but I really can't ask it because I see the confusion among us here. And we're still jumping in bed with white people after the stuff they've done and continue to do to us. And when she said something about the strong black women of Australia, it makes me think of black women here who say, you know, oh, I'm a strong black woman, I'm independent, we hold the community together, but we're steady running in the beds of white people. I mean, I can see the strength of feeling like you're strong because you have to hold stuff together, but how strong is it psychologically if the reason you're having to hold things together by yourself without a mate is because of white people, but yet you're advocating for other black females as well as yourself to go let a white man in your bed? It's like a self-defeating cycle. Even how she was talking about with whatever the act was, which she felt like kind of led black people there to marry white people so they wouldn't have to be under that oppressive act, but you're going right into the bed of the oppressor. So either way, you're still in oppression. One form, I guess, is just a little more subtle, but you're still being directly in the hand of the oppressor now because you're in his bed in his household.
Mm-hmm.
I just wish we would wake up and see, wake up out of the delusions and illusions and see it for what it really is and how it's functioning. It's just like, though I don't look at individual white people and think, ugh, I hate you. Just as a collective group, I cannot dismiss the things they have done and continue to do. And I have to be honest and admit for my own sanity and survival that white people are our enemies. They are not our friends, no matter if you find a white person that's hanging around black people all the time, goes to church with black people, was married to black people. I don't see any of those people renouncing the benefits of being white in a system of white supremacy. I don't see them calling other white people on their crap openly. I don't see them being honest with the black people they're in bed with or otherwise about racism, what it is, how it works. I just don't see it.
Plague.
And I think we need to stop being afraid of what white people will say when we talk about racism. Like recently I've had white people leave comments on my page calling me a racist because I talked about it. It doesn't faze me one bit. And I've had black females who are in sexual relationships, tragic arrangements with white men, tell me that I'm the racist. I'm sorry, but I'm not a member of a race, first of all, and I don't partake in enacting a system that oppresses other people based on the color of their skin. You know, they'll tell you, oh, you self-proclaimed victim. Whether I proclaim it or not, I didn't create a situation to make myself a victim of racism. That was here when I came into the world. So I think we just really have to stop worrying about what they say, their little stupid commentary, things they say to try to intimidate you from, you know, telling the truth. And with I don't even really have a lot of counter-racist videos posted. I'll favorite things and feature things on my YouTube channel, but when I actually start making stuff, I can just imagine the kind of messages that they'll leave. They'll probably try to flag my channel off, but they're not going to like it.
Standard racist protocol. I think that's what I'm going to call it from now on. Standard racist protocol.
You got to get to the point where you really can't care about what other people think or say other than, you know, doing your best to minimize conflict. Which doesn't mean you don't tell the truth. It just means, you know, if you have to cut off the communication, that's what you have to do. And unfortunately, I had to do that with one of my relatives on a social networking site because it was just conflict. So they can see what I post, but they can't comment. And as long as they can't say anything stupid, you know, or insult me, then it's all good.
Absolutely. And I don't see why people get mad at people for posting things, not even things that you write, you know, news articles that's out there, like, you know.
Because black people do not want to we have a problem being honest. We have a problem accepting that we're not on top, that we're not prospering, that we're not doing well, that we're not equal with everybody else. We love the delusion. I posted a video on a high school friend's Facebook profile, and it was in regard to black people and economics. Now, it wasn't saying black people are stupid or lazy or, you know, just, it wasn't saying anything derogatory. It was just the truth that financially we are worse off now, if not in the same place as we were right after slavery. And the man went on to explain why. His whole point of the lecture was to get black people to think and do differently to rectify the situation before it's too late and we become a permanent underclass. The female whose page I posted it on was mad about me, told me not to post that garbage on her page. She went on to talk about how I think black people are losers in this and we're, you know, prosperous people, we're talented, we're gifted, we're this, we're that. Well, why is it that we're still in the position of borrower and white people are still the lenders? Why is it that we own fewer homes probably now than we did after slavery? I mean, you know, we have a problem being honest, and I think part of it, when you are honest and truthful, you have to accept responsibility for your situation and for fixing it. And we don't live in a culture that enables people to feel comfortable, I guess, being responsible. It encourages irresponsibility. When you know you have to, and you accept it and you're truthful about it, you have to do something about it. Or look back and say, man, I chose to do nothing. I know the problem existed, and this is what I'm leaving for my children to inherit. So easier than that is to deny that any problems exist. So it really doesn't matter where the source comes from. Anything that's a wake-up call for victims, for most of them to first of all, to make it clear you are a victim. You're not Charlie Sheen winning in the system we're in right now. I think psychologically it's kind of traumatic and we reject it.
Gus's switchboard must have went down because that "I'm Black and I'm Proud" clip could have played like 2 or 3 times.
Yeah, it's sad. The more I interact with people in my age group, the more convinced I am we really, really do have to work toward educating children, non-white children.
I think I asked Umar Abdullah Johnson, and I think he came to the same conclusion. He said that a lot of grown people aren't going to get with the program. It's going to have to start with children.
You know, it does take work to reprogram yourself to begin to unlearn things you learn that are not true, to find another truth when, nobody's handing it to you like they handed you all the lies. Most of us grew up going to church and sitting in a pew where someone gave us their version of the truth. And we didn't have to do much work to verify anything. We didn't have to do a lot of critical thinking. We didn't have to use logic or reason. So to be at an age where that's been your programming for 30, 40, 50 years, most of us we don't want to do the work. It's traumatic. Like I said before, I remember crying myself to sleep over finding out if a man did exist who was supposed to be the Messiah or the Christ, his name wasn't Jesus, which now I'm further down the line than that. But I literally cried myself to sleep that night because it was traumatic for me to recognize what I had held as truth for so many years was not true.
Yeah, I think people are frightened of the truth.
I do too. And I think a lot of us feel powerless when we find out, how little of the truth we've been exposed to and how much we've been deceived. Are you there, Gus?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, okay. We thought you lost your switchboard.
That is true, but I'm still here.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the truth will set you free. Whatever your talent is, whatever your genius is, it'll really shine when you know what the truth is. And I mean, when you understand the truth, you codify. That means everything that you do, all your conversation, everything is basically, it's more. I don't know. It's just more. I don't know the word, but just like Gus was talking about. Well, when Gus was talking about Fela and how his genius just shined through. I mean, his music is unparalleled. I mean, it's high art because he made the decision. He understood what was going on. So if you look at his music before and after, it's just no comparison. Your shopping, all of the activities, all the human activities will be much better. Your war footing will be better. Your economics will be better because now your sex, everything is like, because you understand that you're not going to spend your money with your enemy. You're not going to have sex with your enemy. When you see your enemy, you understand it's a war, so you strategize. Just using journals, like I use journals, and I recommend all the time the people to use journals, for the different activities, whatever activities you're doing, whatever. Because if you're not codified and you just get up and the racist white supremacists have set up a system where they put you on autopilot. So you'll buy something or you'll get into something before you even know it. Even with a conversation, you'll start talking all kind of madness, biracial, this, black, that, African. I mean, you just, if it was recorded and you played it back, you'll be like, what was I talking about? Like, this whole...
Doesn't make any sense.
This whole thing was nonsense. This whole conversation was straight up nonsense. Because, I just thought, the racists put you on autopilot, and have you making all kind of silly mistakes. And this is life or death, man. This is life and death. You know. Yep. This was a excellent program.
Definitely the gentleman that called in, I wasn't saying definitely, make sure people wasn't, I definitely wasn't attached to that. I wanted to make sure the gentleman called in, I believe he did call in from Australia. You know, if you'd be interested in sharing your views on the program, white people do allow me to call Australia without a fee. So if you would like to share your views, I can dial you, so you don't have to fork over your nickels or whatever the currency is in Australia. I don't even know what it is. The currency over to make the call. We definitely are interested in hearing from non-white people in different areas. We have 9 minutes left in the program. We'll be back on Tuesday. Be talking about exactly what was just touched on, just being mindful of your semantic environment. That's a lot of what Mr. Fuller touches on. I just want to kind of reiterate the importance of that. We've all been conditioned, white people, non-white people, everybody. We've all been well-groomed to use words in a manner that supports the system of white supremacy. And you kind of have to be on constant alert for the way that words are being used around you. Written words, spoken word, you just have to be super vigilant about the way words are being used, because they're going to be used in a way to help white people. So that'll be a big part of the discussion. I could sound clip chunks of this conversation, in fact, for examples of how the semantic environment, the way people are using words, supports white supremacy, even when the discussion is supposed to be against racism, white supremacy. But that'll be Tuesday. Again, Dr. Cambon, definitely want him back on the program. Invest, and just make sure you mark the tab. Dr. Cambon, want him back on so we can hopefully get more people to hear what he has to say. I think he has really constructive information and concepts, so you kind of get a way of thinking about things. Also, the numbers here on the program have been a little strange. Just strange things, peculiar happenings that, only in a system of white supremacy. For example, the program with Mr. Fuller, that set a new record for calls for a live program. The number of live callers, that number has jumped. Even after the live program has concluded, that number is still moving around, which is, very odd. That number shouldn't be fluctuating once the program is done, because, the live segment has ended, so how many ever people listened should be how many ever people listened. That number should be fixed, but that hasn't been the case. It's hopped all around. So I don't know what that means. White people are most likely, up to the usual tricks. But, I hope more people are listening. It seems more people are listening. So hopefully that's constructive. Share the links. It is very helpful in promoting the program. Post it on Facebook, anywhere, Twitter, as many places as possible online. It would be super helpful just to get the word out if you think it's constructive. I wanted to share two quick things, final comments. These are from Dr. Ann Pattel-Gray's book. The first portion, I was reading. Sorry, dropped my bookmark. I was reading her book, and a non-white person was watching I'm getting a lot of background noise. If you could mute your line, that would be helpful. Thank you. A non-white person, he was watching a YouTube documentary on the MOVE chapter in Philadelphia and their house being bombed. And it got to the portion of the recording where Ramona Africa, black female, she was a member of MOVE, and she was saying that she supported self-defense, counter-violence. And she was saying that, any organism has that right. I mean, it doesn't have to be taught. It is a natural instinct for any organism to defend itself. And so I'm hearing this, right? Her giving this explanation that, it is a part of the biological foundation of all organisms to, self-preservation, self-defense. While I was hearing that, I was reading this section of Dr. Ann Pattel-Gray's book, The Great White Flood, where she said, some white people came out and actually acknowledged, yes, we've treated the black people in Australia worse than garbage. It's terrible, and we should feel bad about that and maybe even try to do something. And this is what she writes. This is on page 113. The High Court decision on native title, discarding the myth of Terra nullius, as well as the acknowledgement by the Prime Minister of white injustices, drew immediate and strong reactions from the Australian white public, including shocking displays of racism. People from all walks of life seemed unable to restrain themselves and poured out vicious statements of hatred, fear, and misconception. This could have been expected from those with direct economic interests in specific areas of land. For example, white people who are into mining companies, farming, etc. But the surprise was that it came from all sectors of white Australian society, from the person on the street to newspaper editorials to public figures, even to former prime ministers. And I just thought that outstanding illustration of white people as a total team. And again, I was reading this as I was hearing someone say that every organism defends itself. When the system of white supremacy is attacked, white people defend themselves. The last thing I'll share, if I can get it out, she wrote in the book, this is page 111, Land Rights Struggles. In the last 4 decades, the Aboriginal struggle for justice has become much more focused on land rights. In that time, Aboriginal people have taken bold actions against governments and in the courts of white Australian law. Not surprisingly, until 1992, all of these actions were unsuccessful. In 1963, the people of Yirrkala on the Gove Peninsula in northeast Arnhem Land, Northern Territory, sent a bark petition to the federal parliament. The humble petition of the undersigned Aboriginal people pray that no arrangements be entered into with any company which will destroy the livelihood and independence of the Aboriginal people. Though the petition was highly publicized, it nevertheless was ignored, and a church-backed multinational corporation began massive mining operations that ripped up the traditional lands of the Aboriginal people. Importantly, the case drew significant attention to the Arnhem land. Yet, unbelievably, things got worse. And this just reminded me, Mr. Fuller's brand new word guide. He has one of the words in there is the phrase, things could be worse. And he tells victims to not use the term. He says, do not use